How's it going, y'all? So today I'm gonna show you another pretty solid scan. This one, I'll tell you the name at the end because it's a pretty technical name. But essentially what you're gonna be looking at for this scan is range. So the first thing you wanna look at is you wanna see that the stocks that you're scanning for are what's called an inside day. Basically, it's a day where the range is, and when we say range, we're talking about the range from the low point to the high point, right? We want to see that that range is completely within for today. Let's say we're looking at today's range. We want to see that it's the whole range for today is contained within yesterday's range, right? So if yesterday's range was 0 to 100, we want to see that today's range falls somewhere between 0 and 100, so maybe 10 to 90, right? So that's the first part of this scan. The second part of the scan is looking at the narrow range over 4 day period. So this is what we would say is looking that today's range has been more narrow than it has been in the previous 3 days, right? So we combine those two things together, we get the name of the scan, which is an ID, which stands for inside day, an ID NR4 day scan. And NR is a narrow range over 4 days. So I'll go ahead and show you what that looks like when you code for it. But essentially, what this is going to do is help you find stocks based on closing price once again, but we're looking at a trend. So let's go ahead and get started. For this one, the type is going to be the stock, right? And then the next line is going to be on range. So we want to see that today's range, we want to see that it's greater than yesterday's max and minimum, right? So yesterday's minimum is, we'll put 3, and we're looking at the range, right? And so we did the minimum here, and now we're going to do the same thing. But instead of looking at range in this way, we're going to look for the high. We're going to separate it out. So we're going to look at today's high to be greater than yesterday's high. And we want to see today's low is greater than yesterday's low. And so just a reminder that it's a two-part. So we want to see the inside day, which is those last two lines, line 3 and 4. This is looking for that inside day to be contained. So we want today's high to be less than yesterday's high, right? And actually, this should say greater than because we want it contained. So we want to see that today's high is less than yesterday's high, but we want to see that today's low is greater than yesterday's low. And so that's how we get that inside day. And then the way we get the narrow range is by looking at today's range and making sure that it's less than yesterday's range over the past 3 days, which is or not yesterday's range, but that it's greater or it's less than the low over the past 3 days. So that's that NR4 days part of the scan. So when you go ahead and run that, you get 623 results. I'm actually going to do what I usually do just to narrow our results even further, which is add the country. Oops, and we'll make sure that the closing price is greater than 0 or greater than 1. All right, so let's go ahead and run that, and we get half the results. So 308, which is still plenty. We'll go ahead and look from the top, and let's look at Whirlpool as one example. And so what we're looking at is that today's range, so the maximum and minimum, has been more narrow than it has been the previous days. And if you look here, it's all pretty narrow in and of itself. But we're also looking that it's contained within yesterday's range. So it is. If we look closely, we can see yesterday's range, the red line. This is the high, and this is the open, and this is the close, right? And this is today's open, and this is today's close, or where it's at currently. And so you can see that it is contained within the yesterday's range. So this is one example. Let's look at another example. And let's look at Achilles Therapeutics. Well, it's not the best example because it doesn't have much of a history. But if we were to look here, we can see that the range, which is including the low here and which here would be the open, is all contained within today's range. So that's one. And then we're also looking that the range gets narrower and narrower over the past few days, and the range does get narrow here, um, and so on. So it's not the best example because it doesn't have much data, but let's go ahead and look at one more example. So let me go ahead and filter this. Let's look at Cooper Company. All right, and so here we see um, the range is contained, barely, but it is contained. And then we look at the previous days, they have narrowed. So we look at, and when we look at narrowing, we're looking at the high and low. We're not just looking at the open and close prices. So that's this particular scan. As you may have noticed that, except for the last one because it looked like an IPO, you can see that the trend for these stocks is upward. So if you're looking for a growth stock, this might be a helpful tool. But this is just one of many scans that you can use to help with your trading strategies. So I hope it was helpful. Let me know what your thoughts are in the comments. Take care.